Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Growing Your Dental Business podcast. My name is Jacqueline Hurley, and I'm the director of Dental Zine, which is the educational platform for both Dr. Charles Blair's Practice Booster and for eAssist Dental Solutions. I'm super excited to welcome you today to our guest, who is Chris Haynes. She is the founder of Dental WebSmart Insurance Solutions, providing implementation and training of EFT and ERA, which is an electronic version of EOB, she explained to me. And we're excited to have her. Her education, practice management, and clinical skills have allowed her to provide a modernized technology insurance system to her consulting services by engaging the dental provider, clearinghouse, and payer by simplifying the EFT payment setup. So welcome, Chris. We're really excited to have you today.
I'm excited to be here to share this information with everybody.
Good. So we know that EFTs are electronic funds transferring from money from the bank, basically from the insurance company to the provider's bank account. So, and that could be in different forms, whether it's an e-check or electronic check or something along those lines. So if we're talking about EFTs, what challenges do you help dentists and their teams solve, and why? Why have you focused on EFTs directly?
I've focused on EFTs because I can honestly say that I physically, obviously, have worked in a dental practice. And what I found was the EFTs, once I started implementing that same system in the practice that I was working at, that it was just made everything so much more efficient as far as the payment. And what I mean by efficient is it definitely improved the cash flow of the practice when you put those type of technology systems in place. You're receiving payment within 2 to 7 days versus, a week or 2 weeks, depending on when the check comes in the mail, basically. So the number one thing is definitely improves cash flow. And I can say to you today, I did some research before we did this podcast today because I really wanted to find for myself what the stats were of how many practices were physically submitting claims electronically. And I found out that there's 86% of dental practices across the board that are sending their claims electronically, which is, I'm surprised it's not 100% at this point, but there's practices out there that prefer the old way of doing things. But what really surprised me the most was to find out that there's only 17% of practices receiving electronic payment. Now that's a big difference. I'm gonna stop and think about it. You're sending it electronically, 86%, but you only have 17% that are physically receiving electronic payment.
Right, that's very few.
I mean, and we really, I feel at this point, we really need practices to realize the benefits of this type of system. Because, I mean, we all know that eventually technology, the way it is, it changes day to day. Sometimes I have to keep up with it. So I seriously think that practices, once they learn the system that they can put in place to achieve this, to improve their cash flow, they would definitely be on board with it. And you have to stop and think about how many practices have been dealing with so much stuff the last few years. They don't have time to really do that type, put those systems in place. They're just struggling to do the day-to-day stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
That sounds great.
With remote billers too, like eAssist, you're outsourcing it, and remote billers and stuff. I mean, this technology is the number one thing really that helps remote workers too, because they can customize what they do, how they work remotely, and the systems that they use.
Right. Have you worked with any practices yourself that have gone from like the old way of not doing things digitally and then helping them set up EFTs?
Oh, yes. Yeah, many, many. I actually, well, my first thought was back in 2009, okay, EFT. And that's where a lot of practices really weren't familiar with EFT. But I got my business name in 2012. So I have helped many practices put the EFT systems in place. And it's always very helpful to me to have one specific person in the practice that I can interact with, because they're sharing a lot of information with me about their practice, about their bank information, if I do it myself. And I've actually done the setup process for some practices that have more than one location. Now that's a little bit more of a challenge. I did one and it was 6 locations. And it probably pretty much took me most of the year to do that.
Wow. Yeah. It takes time to get everything set up.
Because I had to do each practice, separately.
Sure.
And yeah, so it was a process for sure. I just would like to share a story with you about a particular practice from Texas. Husband and wife, the wife was the office manager. They reached out to me as far as getting set up for EFTs. They didn't really know a lot about it, but they were interested in finding out more. And I finally got them to a point where they understood the benefit of it for them. And that was in 2019. I encouraged them to do it, and they jumped on board with it. Fast forward to March of 2020, and we all know what March of 2020 was. That's when COVID hit.
Right.
Well, this particular practice, and we all know practices had to close down, right? But they were still seeing emergency patients, right? So it was probably about a month maybe into probably April that they contacted me and thanked me over and over about encouraging them to set up for electronic payment, because those emergency patients that they were seeing, they were still getting paid electronically.
Nice.
So you just stop and think about it. And they realize, because they have other like referral doctors that they communicate with, that we're still receiving paper checks. I mean, they were not set up for EFT, but they weren't getting paid because they received checks. You stop and think about it. Nobody was at the insurance company to print paper checks. They probably were working remotely to process an electronic payment, but they didn't have access to print checks remotely. So that, to them, that was huge. And they just thanked me over and over again. So to me, that said it all right there. That just made my day, that I helped a practice realize the benefit of that. And
great. Yeah, that sounds amazing. Well, I'm glad that's just a story of one practice you've been able to help. And
I want to give you 2 more stats real quick.
Sure.
Which I think is very, very interesting. When there's only 31% that are using the electronic attachment systems, right?
Okay. Yeah.
Attaching X-rays to receive payments. Stop and think about that. 31%.
Wow.
And then, as far as verification of benefits, that's a huge thing for practices. They are at 75%. So that's encouraging that they do that. But with the technology the way it is, I'm surprised that it's only 31% that they're attaching X-rays, and they wonder why they're not getting paid. Because insurance companies are so specific on that these days.
I was just trying to think of some of the other reasons. Like you talked a little bit about some of the benefits, and are there any other reasons you can think of why it's beneficial for a practice to implement dental insurance EFTs?
I would say the benefits of receiving EFT payments basically is you have to stop and think about it this way. When dental practices start receiving electronic payment, that gives the doctor access to his funds a lot sooner. His cash flow is much better because he has access to it.
Right.
And really, another great benefit is the threat of lost or stolen checks. Stop and think about it. How many times have practices maybe misplaced checks because they get so many of them in one day, they put them somewhere and then they get kind of lost in the shuffle at the front desk, right?
That's
so
thing, I'm sure. I know I talked to a lot of practice when I was on the quality assurance team where I talked to front desk and they're like, they hadn't been able to post because they had been tucking away thinking I'll get to it when I have time, but then what if things get misplaced? Yeah. Good point.
That's just a big factor. I mean, that really is. And then the other benefit would be the payment cycle, 2 to 7 days of payment. I mean, think about it. If you submit an electronic claim and you can get paid 2 days later, I mean, that's huge right there in itself. So ultimately, the biggest benefit is just, again, going back to putting those systems in place for improve their cash flow to keep the practice running.
I think that's great. Another thing you had mentioned is maybe checks were getting stolen. That could be, it's probably easier to embezzle money from the dentist if there's live checks floating around and things like that.
It is. It is, and you're always going to find some people that are very tempted to do that stuff. I mean, I myself, even though I'm pretty up on technology and all that stuff, I don't know how people really get that thought in their head to do that without thinking that they wouldn't get caught at some point. But yeah, I mean, that's a sad thing.
I know. We had a guest a while back, David Harris, who is an embezzlement specialist, and he had a lot of stories and ways, just things that you just have to watch out for. So that's unfortunate. So I can see how EFTs can really make a difference in that department. So,
well, can I go into a benefit of that to talk about the lost and stolen checks part of it and how with this EFT system that I'm talking about, it really gets so you don't get embezzled, right? As much because they're just not going to have access to the checks. Right. And if you put the right systems in place, and that's one thing I encourage doctors, if you're going to set up to receive electronic payment, you need to make sure you put safeguard system in place so you don't get the risk of embezzlement. And it's really not that complicated because banks and insurance carriers are federally mandated, so they have to have secure features in place too. And a lot of doctors give their employees too much access or leeway to buy access to their bank account by going to the bank themselves and talking to a representative for them. That's where they need to stop that. They need to stop giving their employee access to that stuff. So
that makes sense. So you've been passionate about EFTs for a very long time, and it kind of has led you to create an app all for EFTs. Can you tell us a little bit about that and what what that's all about. Just tell us about that.
Yes, I'm very excited about this. I've literally been working on this for 2 years. Back in 2019, I actually had a developer develop a personal app just for me, for my personal use, to keep track of all practice, my clients' personal information, banking information. I'm thinking, okay, here I talk about technology, but I've got all these papers around me, so I'm thinking, okay. So he did that. And one day the thought just came to me, wow, what if there was an app out there that would be so helpful and beneficial to these dental practices to use this platform to set up for electronic payment themselves. And I actually have two different options that I've worked on, and it's actually on my website. One option is a monthly thing where the practice actually does the setup themselves. And then the other option is to outsource it, which means they prefer not to set it up themselves. They prefer me to do it. So they have two different options to choose that. Now, if they choose to do it themselves, once they get into the app, access to the app itself, they're going to have everything they need within this app. Everything. Access to each insurance company to register for EFT, keeping notes. There's frequently asked questions in there. There's guidance. There's documents. There's articles I've written. And of course, there's information on there for anybody that needs to communicate with me more so by reaching out to me by email or phone calling. I'm always open to any phone calls. If anybody has questions, they have access to the websites. But the beauty of it, it's all in one place to do that and to keep track of when they actually registered, their interaction with someone from the insurance company, right? If they interacted with them verbally, they can make notes and the date, so there's a lot to it.
It sounds like there is, and it sounds like this app is just a way to simplify this dental insurance process and helping them get everything set up. It sounds like it's everything they need to understand how to set up the EFTs.
That's true. And what I found from experience, because I had practices reach out to me that tried to do it themselves, and that's all good. They do it themselves. And I think I have that on my website, that if you're struggling with it, I have a support package, that they can, reach out to me, and I'm glad to help them, guide them through it. And I think ultimately what happens is they start the process and they only do like maybe 2 or 3. They set up for 2 or 3 and they stop. But they have to remember, when they're setting up for EFT, they have to also let the insurance company know where they want the ERAs delivered, the electronic version of the EOB. They need, everything's technology, so they need to let the insurance carrier know where they want that delivered. It can be sent in an email, it can be sent by fax, or you can physically, as a practice, go into the website, the insurance carrier website, and pull the EOB from there. And that's why I put the websites in there. So later on, if they needed to access it for verification or accessing EOBs, they could do it right within the app also.
That's great. That sounds really good. Yeah, no, it sounds like you have really simplified, taken steps to simplify everything, especially with all the different insurance agencies out there. I know we were going to talk a little bit about virtual credit cards. Tell me a
Mm,
little bit. I know you have mentioned there's some challenges are happening with insurance payments when it comes to virtual credit cards.
yeah, it's very much a challenge. Um, I found, I think it was like at the end of last year, about this time last year, and into the beginning of this year, that a lot of practices got bombarded with virtual credit card payments. So the way they had to look at this, the reason why they were doing that, this was their way of forcing dental practices to make a decision on how they get paid, whether it's by check, virtual credit card, or EFTs. That's really what that process was.
Oh,
But the sad thing is, dental practices did not request to get paid this way. It was like all of a sudden it started coming at them that way. So for them to deal with that, and I saw the frustration. I'm, you know, a part of some of these groups on Facebook. Not that I really interact that much on Facebook these days,
yeah.
but I saw the frustration. I mean, these practices, these ladies were just beside themselves because they were overwhelmed with this virtual credit card stuff. So, what I can share with them is there is a website that they can go to. It's called echovcards.com. The word echo, ECHO, V is in victory, cards.com. And that is a portal basically for them to go on there that saves them time from not having to physically pick up the phone and call, because they were so bombarded. All these practices, they had to wait online forever. That was the big thing. They were waiting online to get through. But
Wow.
this portal gives you access to click on it, put the information in there. Basically, it's kind of like they call it a draft number, I believe, and then the amount, the doctor's tax ID, or, stuff like that. And then you just click submit that you want a paper check. And that's how you can eliminate the virtual credit card stuff.
So it sounds like insurance companies just decide that's how they're going to pay
Oh,
you, and you have no paper trail of where it comes from or what is coming, why those funds are coming, and then that really puts you at a loss because you don't know. That's a daily, your daily accounting is all thrown off. You don't know you've got this money coming in, and you don't know where it is tied to.
well,
And
they do send you, they were good about this. They were faxing a copy of that EOB to practices.
okay.
I think that was the main focus on how they actually sent it to practices, that they were paying them that way, was through fax. They received it on their fax machines. And like I said, a lot of practices didn't request this, so they were confused by it. So, to another important thing, and I'm not trying to disregard what another business does, but there are some businesses out there that offer to help dental practices set up for electronic payment, but they have to be very careful when they use those businesses. And this is the reason why they charge 1.99% if you go through this business and they set you up for electronic payment. Any of the carriers this particular company works with, they charge the dental practice 1.99% to deposit every EFT deposited in their bank account.
Wow,
So when I first came across this, I was like, you've got to be kidding me. And I've had had practice doctors actually reach out to me, and they're beside themselves. How can I fix this? I go, well, I'm sorry to say, but you basically would have to cancel everything that you've done with them. In other words, cancel the EFT setup and redo it. Mm-hmm. Start from scratch and redo it.
Yeah. Well, everyone has a business idea, right? And someone obviously came up with that idea. And, and there are dentists out there that probably want to get more digital and they want to get more electronic. So they're thinking this is an easy way to do it. And you have to read all the fine print for sure.
Yeah, well, you're right. They don't, because I've called as a dental practice and found out the breakdown. That's why I know so much about that.
Yeah, that makes total sense. So, okay, we've talked about your app and we've talked about why EFTs are so important. And we've talked about the percentages or the stats of how few of dentists are really taking advantage of using EFTs in their practice and setting them up. And it sounds like it kind of is a pain to set up, especially each individual one.
It's complicated because every insurance company is different. And that's where the app is beneficial. I mean, I've got, all of the ones that you can do it electronically. But yet I've also got all of the information that they need if there's particular companies out there that use a form to do it. Right. Or some, believe it or not, there's one particular company that you actually have a phone number to call them and do it. And that's okay. But all that information is in there.
Good. That sounds great. So what is the best way to get a hold of you, Chris, if someone's interested in getting help to set up their EFTs?
The best way would be to probably email me at dentalwebsmart@gmail.com. Okay. Or they can physically call me. They could actually, what they could do is go to my website. I have an 800 number listed on the website, or they can schedule a call with me if they have any more questions. They can physically schedule a call right on within the website.
That's wonderful. It sounds like you have like a complimentary consultation that they could utilize to just kind of learn more information. But you also have an additional promo along with this podcast. What is your promotion for this podcast?
The promotion that I thought would be very beneficial and very helpful to these dental practices. Any offices, like the first 7 practices that actually registers for the app, access to the app, will have a 1-hour free support from me. So that means when they're in the process of doing it, they get a 1-hour free training to help them through the process of doing that. And it's really not the app, I don't find, for me, I guess, but someone else, it could be a little bit more of a challenge. But, the training part of it, I thought would be a beneficial promo for someone.
Yeah, no, that sounds great. I'm sure there's definitely a process of learning how to set up those EFTs, and if they have an hour of your time, then you can just walk them through the process. Even with one insurance company, then they kind of have an idea of how it works. And sounds like the app is pretty user friendly, but it might be helpful to have your hand holding a little bit at the beginning.
Yeah, definitely.
That sounds great. So is there any parting thoughts that you have that you'd like to share today before we wrap up?
I would say my parting thoughts for dental practices, anybody that listens to the podcast, from the stats that I came across in my research, I was really quite surprised that there was only 17% receiving electronic payments. So I feel like we really have a long way to go. And with this app as an additional benefit to any practice that would help them in that process, I think that would be a great system to put in place and to use the app for that.
That sounds wonderful. Well, I'm really excited for you, Chris. I know you put a lot of blood, sweat, tears,
I
and
did.
information into this app, and I'm proud of you. Good job, girlfriend. You've done a great job pulling that app together, and anyone who's interested, any provider can definitely purchase that app. And even if they use a third-party dental billing company, they can purchase that app, and it'll make it easier for the teams to set up those electronic payments. So
Exactly. Yep. It's for remote billers also,
that's
correct?
great. So our goal is to offer tips and tricks to help dentists grow their business. And I want you to know that if you're looking for a way to simplify your EFTs, then reach out to Chris. She'd love to help you get set up. That is the end of our podcast today, and I hope everyone has a great day.
Thank you, Jacqueline.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Bye.